Hi and welcome to another episode of The Leadership Enigma. Now, I was in the studio last night at 8:30 and I was having that incredible conversation with Dr. Mark Goulston. And then I'm here again the very next day in the morning having an amazing conversation with my guest who you will meet very soon, Jenifer Rosenberg OBE. And it just reminds me how much of a privilege this platform is to have conversations that ordinarily I would never have had. To meet people, to learn, to be inspired, to share, to provoke thinking, in some ways to reflect. And this episode is a wonderful opportunity to hear from someone who can reflect through an amazing career. And this episode is called Miniskirts to Medicine, because you'll understand why when I speak to my guest. She was the founder of the largest privately owned ladies' clothing manufacturer. She had, before that, an amazing career at M&S, and we'll talk about that. And now she is also the chair of the board of the Heart Cells Foundation. And there are stories behind all of those elements of her life. So don't miss this episode of Miniskirts to Medicine. Come back to me just after this. Hi, I'm Adam Pacifico, and welcome to The Leadership Enigma, a world-ranked, award-winning podcast that's insatiably curious as regards what leaders do, how they do it, and importantly, why. We'll delve into the human doing, but even deeper into the human being and the power of human-centered leadership to drive sustainable change. So whether you're an entrepreneur, business owner, corporate executive, each week we speak to global experts, academics, rising stars, ambitious upstarts and disruptors, as together we will discover that success leaves clues. So Jenifer, it is a huge and warm welcome to the Leadership Enigma. How are you? I'm
very well, and I'm delighted to say I didn't get lost on my journey to North London.
I didn't think you would. Come on, you're a Londoner as well.
I am a Londoner, but normally I don't go very far north of St John's Wood, but I made it.
But
I got there.
Thank you.
I think it was Gales was the temptation that got me to the
Gales
right place.
Bakery works every time for us.
So right,
so
100%.
It's part of the story. This is your first podcast in a studio. What do you think?
This is my first podcast in a studio, and I'm very impressed. I love the Leadership Enigma podcast. I think it looks great, absolutely great. I don't know who designed it, but they did a great job.
Well, James is somewhere in the background, probably with a very big smile on his face now.
James, you did a great job. It looks wonderful.
I was really excited for you to come in.
Thank you.
And as I said to you, and I mean that every single conversation I have, I think is a blessing, it's a privilege, it's humbling. I learn, I hope it adds value. And I only have to have one person, Jenifer, who gets hold of me and says, do you know what? I listened to your episode with Jenifer. And that made me think. That had an impact on me. And so that is what I hope for this episode and what I hope really as a continuation of the podcast.
Well, I hope so too. As I said, this is the first time I've done a live podcast, so if I'm a bit nervous, you'll have to sort of forgive me. But, I'm hoping that when people speak to you and say they saw the podcast, they'll say to you, what is that amazing charity that Jenifer is running, the Heart Cell Foundation?
Well, we're going to be talking about that.
That is what it's all about. That's why I'm here today.
Well, I want us to talk about the lead up to that as well, because you've had an incredible career, and I know that you were Veuve Clicquot Businesswoman of the Year as well. Can I say that? I can mention that too as well, can't
I'm sure Veuve Clicquot will be delighted. They may even send you a bottle of champagne.
Well,
who knows?
If you say so, Jenifer, then I think it may well already be in the post. You've had an amazing career, and there is so much richness and learning and experiences that I want to break it down into three stages, if I may. And I'm oversimplifying, Jenifer, so forgive me. Tell us a little bit about the fact, because I know you didn't go to university, but you went to Marks and Spencer's, didn't you? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, first
phase.
of all, I was never an academic.
Right.
Although I did reasonably well at school, I managed to sort of get by, really, just by winging it.
Yeah.
But I was really very excited to leave school. And my first love was really the theatre. I'd gone to drama school, I'd gone to Ada Foster and all that sort of thing. And that's really what I wanted to do. But my parents was not having it.
Right.
They knew that in that world, more people were resting than working. And they just felt it wasn't right. And they didn't think I was that good enough anyway to make it. But they knew of somebody that was working at M&S, and they thought that would offer me a good opportunity to develop my business skills. So I wrote to them and I got a job, and I was offered a job in the post room, pushing a post trolley, which wasn't the most exciting thing to be doing when you leave school.
But it's a start.
It's the start when you've got girlfriends going into banking, advertising, and there I was going to be pushing a post trolley. But it was, as you say, Adam, it was the start.
Yes.
And I knew that I had the opportunity once I was there to climb up the ladder. So I went to M&S. I was 16 years old. I'd taken my O-levels, or GCSEs now.
Yeah.
And when I arrived, I was in the post room for 2 weeks. And because I'd got reasonably good marks with my O-levels, they immediately promoted me to the accounts department.
Right.
So 2 weeks pushing the post trolley, then I go into accounts. And I managed, I was always very ambitious. And I was always, every time I had an assessment, we used to call them staff manageresses, then now it's human resources. But every time I saw somebody, I was always saying, well, where am I going next? What's happening?
You were in a hurry.
I was in a hurry. But I was very lucky when I was in the accounts department because that was the department that was responsible for getting all the company checks signed. In those days, you paid your suppliers by checks, that old-fashioned thing.
Some people will remember that very well.
Some people will. And to send these checks out, you needed 2 signatures.
Right.
So you needed the company secretary's signature plus a director. And I was given this job, although it was very supervised, where I went to go round to the various directors every day that were there to get these checks signed.
Collect their autograph.
Get their autograph. So somehow I got known. And, a lot of these directors were of mature years, and they were quite happy to have somebody come in their office. They'd have a little chat, whatever, and get the check signed. So I suppose I got noticed as well. And my mother always told me, and I remember it to this very day, when you walk through a door, that first impression is what matters, because you've got like 5 seconds
First
to make that
impressions
impression, and that impression lasts.
Wow.
And I always made sure every day I went to work, I was always well turned out. Or my mother always made sure I was well turned out.
See, there's a mother behind the success.
A mother behind a success story,
with that.
Absolutely. But when we were in the post room, we got checked to make sure we were dressed properly before we went out.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And M&S's dress code standards were very high. You just had to dress properly.
Now, this was in, let's be honest, quite an exciting era, because we're talking about the swinging 60s, aren't we? What was that like to be working in fashion, even if it's the post room to start with, in the swinging 60s?
It hadn't actually happened when I was in the post room.
Okay.
But it did when I got into the buying departments. That's when the
Right.
60s started about 62, 63.
Okay.
It imploded. It was, to be part of that era, I feel very privileged.
Yes.
Because every day or every week there was something new happening, whether it was Twiggy or Mary Quant or Vidal Sassoon or the Beatles. London was the epicentre of everything. You had Carnaby Street. It was just so exciting. And M&S looked at what was happening in the high street and realised that they had to do something. And they had well-established buying departments with very mature buyers, but they realised that they had to change if they were going to capture what was happening in the high street. So there were about 3 of us were picked out, and we were given buying departments to run.
Right.
We were only in our 20s. Incredibly young.
This is fast, trajectory for you, because you say you had the humility to start in the post room. And then you thought to yourself, once I'm in, I'll make this happen.
But then I finished up in the skirt department, I was about 21, 22.
Right.
And mini skirts were happening, and we were all wearing them. And, I proposed, I always remember it was Teddy Seif, who was the chairman at the time, and I said to him, sir, we should be trialling these skirts. This is what's happening. And of course, M&S were very conservative. And he said to me, I put it up against me, and because I was short, it looked longer than it really would be on on a taller woman. Anyway, he said, but we were always allowed, this was the wonderful thing about working at M&S, they always allowed you to try everything. We worked in dozens, not singles, but you'd have a 50 dozen trial or 100 dozen trial, and you prove then whether it worked or it didn't.
Okay.
And that was a wonderful vehicle for growing that business, an incredible vehicle. So we put out the 50 dozen miniskirts, and of course they just walked out. And then we couldn't make enough of them. It was like go, go, go.
And what happened to your success your personal brand within M&S?
My personal career, we just leapt up the ladder. It was unbelievable. I was running skirts, and then we did a trial of ladies' trousers, because they didn't have trousers. They had like these not leggings, but stirrup pants. They didn't actually have a trouser department, so I created a trouser department. And again, that was done with trials. I was given a small budget, and I had no interference from anybody. I was allowed to do exactly as I thought was right, and we did. And again, it was another success.
Just think you were probably responsible for some of the fashion that came out of M&S and maybe that was raging in the 60s.
It was very, and also then we started with jackets. M&S didn't have a jacket department. They didn't have a coat department.
Yeah.
And I bought for myself a beautiful velvet blazer. There was a range of shops in London called Castell, Coronel, run by the Castles, the most amazing company. And I bought this beautiful velvet jacket.
Right.
And I brought it into M&S, and again it was Teddy Stephen, because they always called us by our names, like Miss Levine. The Christian names didn't exist. So he said, Miss Levine, he said, velvet is for the evening. Who's going to wear velvet during the day? I said, well, sir, I bought this for myself, and I am planning to wear it during the day, because I think this is the new look, the way things are going. All right, then do a trial. And we did a trial, and the rest is history.
So what do you put your success down, being young and new in the business and in the industry, but having these, in some ways, some might think audacious conversations with the seniors to say, hang on, let me try something.
But the senior board interacted with us.
Yep.
They came in, they knew who we were by name.
Right.
It wasn't like they were up there and we were down there.
So there was a unity between.
There was a unity, and they believed, like they would go down to the store, Marble Arch, and talk to the sales assistant on the counter, what is selling, what are the customers saying. They wanted to know what was happening.
So they worked very much on the shop floor at ground level.
And they didn't want, not podcasts, but they didn't want charts and this and that. They wanted to really know what was happening. We used to, when I was in distribution, because I had a couple of years there, we had, on a Friday, we had what was called the Royal Route. So there were certain stores that the board would go to because they were on their way to their country homes. Right. So we had like Windsor, Maidenhead, Slough, Staines, and we had to make sure that all those stores had a good range of stock.
Okay.
For
people popping in.
For when the board visited. So they were so on the ball. It was incredible. What's
your biggest takeaway from, because I know you left M&S in 73? 73. So what's kind of your biggest takeaway or your biggest reflection from that incredible period of learning?
I think communication was one of the big things I learned, because the board communicated with us. I mean, they didn't
face to face.
We didn't get we didn't have a system where he'd speak to this one. He'd come directly to us on the buying floor and communicate with us.
And we didn't have the technology at that point either. So there was that human proximity and face to face.
Absolutely.
Maybe we've lost some of that.
I think we have. Like you were just saying downstairs, when you were phoning, let's phone rather than send a message.
Yeah,
I'm a great telephone person. I think phoning is communication is.
That's
so
why
important.
I was keen for you to come into the studio, Jenifer.
Absolutely, I agree with you. 100%.
Much more fun, isn't it?
So other thing I learned was structure. When we were putting ranges together, it was quite interesting. Say I take a skirt range or blouse range is easier. You'd have to make sure when you were in distribution, you'd send a sleeveless blouse, a short sleeve blouse, and a long sleeve blouse. And then you had structures in stores. You had your smaller stores that would have just a range of 3. Then your next group of stores would have maybe a range of 5. And then your top stores would have a range of 8 or 10.
Right.
And that structure is so important.
So it sounds as if that was an incredible period for you, almost of learning and experimenting and getting things right, maybe getting things wrong. And I know, so you left M&S in 1973 and you started J&J in Newcastle.
But before we go on to that, I just have to tell you what my year was like in that 73. It was the most incredible year.
Go on.
First of all, this was in the February of 73. M&S were big supporters of Israel. And Tel Aviv was having its first fashion week. And Marks and Spencer decided to put a group of people from the industry, retailers, manufacturers together and take them to Israel to show them Israel, but the strides Israel was making in the fashion industry.
In 73, this is.
Right, this is in February 73, before the Yom Kippur War in 73. Right. And I was chosen as the M&S representative. So I went, and it was very exciting. It was my first time in Israel and whatever. So I was there. Then in the March, M&S did an enormous amount of business buying textiles from a big American company called Burlington Mills.
Right.
But nobody from M&S went to America to visit them. And that their board were very upset.
Oh, right. They didn't get a personal visit.
They
Okay.
didn't get the personal.
The personal touch.
Absolutely. So the chairman of Burlington came to see the chairman of M&S, who at that time now was Marcus Seif. And he said, look, if you don't want to pay for them to come, we'll pay for them to come. But these girls have got to come and see what we're about.
Right.
So the next thing, we were all on a jaunt to New York. So there was about 6 of us.
Yes.
And of course M&S paid. There was no way they were going to let Burlington Mills pay. So there we are. Remember, we're only in our 20s.
And this is 1973, which is not the
1973.
norm like perhaps today in the way we travel.
It was my first trip to America. We flew first class on a jumbo. It was unbelievable.
Where, to New York? Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it was just sensational. So that was that. Then the next thing that year, it was the most incredible year I had.
Right.
M&S is looking to open up in Europe. And they'd already bought 2 properties, one in Brussels and one in Paris.
Okay.
So they put a team together to go and, do an exploratory trip to see what sort of merchandise would work in Europe.
Okay.
So I get asked to be on that team.
You're on a world tour
I'm on
now,
a world
Jennifer.
tour. In the meantime, I'm running
Mid-20s, 1973.
I'm running a multi-million-pound buying department. Here I am in Israel, New York, and now Europe.
Wow.
So that was my year.
And that was the year that you transitioned.
That was the year I transitioned.
So I want us to move on to that next phase, because J&J actually became the UK's largest privately owned ladies' clothing manufacturer. So tell us, how did that happen? So in 73, you were having this phenomenal year.
Incredible year.
But you ended up transitioning out of M&S.
Yes.
How come?
Well, it was really to do with my personal life.
Okay. Go
So
on.
I-
Go on.
Go on.
Tell us,
This
Jennifer.
is going to be X-rated.
No, but you know what? It's. I always come back to, there are certain things that you have done, the human doing, but I'm really interested in the human being.
Well, what happened was I was married,
Yep.
not very happily, and then I got involved with an M&S manufacturer who was very large. He was then the MD of a public company called Sellencourt.
Right.
So our relationship developed, and then we basically, he left his wife, I left my husband, and we became an item.
Okay.
But that was a bit tricky for M&S because
Still the 1970s, right?
well, not only that, he was one of the largest suppliers in my department, and other manufacturers went knocking on various doors saying this isn't very ethical, and they're quite right. I mean, you're with somebody in a relationship, and you're obviously going to make sure. I mean, it's very difficult to be impartial.
Yes.
So to cut a long story short, I got moved out of ladies' wear where I was flying high into men's shirts because I had to go into a department that he wasn't involved in.
I see. Right.
So
how did you feel about that? What your choices you'd made in your personal life were having an impact in your high-flying professional life?
That was the whole point. That was my choice.
Yeah.
That was my choice. And I suppose I was too young to really understand the implications when everybody knew.
Right.
And they actually had a board meeting about how to deal with it.
So it became very public very quickly.
Very public, very quickly. Oh,
right.
Yeah, you couldn't keep something like that under wraps.
Okay.
Anyway, so then I finished up in menswear. And then the managing director of menswear was Derek Rayner, who then became the chairman of M&S. And he really liked me. And it was all going very well in menswear. I was quite happy, but my husband-to-be wasn't happy because then I'm travelling in an area that he's not involved in.
Right.
And he couldn't come on the trips, and he just didn't like it.
Because they'd separated you, deliberately why they put you into
because
men's.
when I look back on it, it's the most logical thing to do. I mean, I couldn't be, giving out contracts.
Of course.
It's just.
So they were managing the potential conflict of interest. Understood.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So then I'm enjoying being on menswear. I'm working with. It's very different, but I was quite happy.
So you're still learning because you're now in a completely different arena.
And I was in men's shirts.
Okay.
Which again was had taken off big time in the 60s with Michael John. You're too young to remember.
Oh, bless you.
But Michael John with the voile shirts and everything. And you had Lord John. You had all these menswear shops that had just
So did you hit the timing right again?
No,
then?
no, I came after it, but it was still there. It was still happening with menswear. But my husband didn't like this. He didn't like the fact that I was going to be travelling, and he said to me, "I haven't left my wife, who I've been married to for 30 years, to come home, and you're off to Paris here and everywhere." So he said, "I think what we'll do is I'll start a factory for you. You can become an M&S manufacturer." So he had a chat with the people in ladies' wear, and they were quite happy about it. So that's how it happened. So I went to menswear in the June, and I left M&S in the December.
To start J&J. And am I right in thinking you went to Newcastle first? So tell us, how comes it started in Newcastle?
Well, because my husband, Jack, we'll call him Jack, give him a name, Jack Goldstein, he had a factory there.
Right.
He already had a factory. Okay. And it was easy for him to help set me up where he had all the skills.
Right.
So it's basically a spin-off of his factory.
Okay, it's funny how life sometimes throws opportunities. Now, I'm right, Jack passed though, didn't he, in 75?
In Christmas 75,
yeah. Now, tell me kind of what that was like.
Well, it was awful.
I appreciate.
But I'd already lost my father, and I was incredibly close to my father. And when my father died, that probably is the most traumatic thing that's ever happened to me in my life.
How old were you when your father?
I was 23.
So young.
So young.
Right.
And I was so close to my dad, and I'd never really experienced loss, and it was just horrific, absolutely horrific. And so when you've been through loss once, I'm not saying it's easier the second time, but you deal with it. You can deal with it better. So you have
an experience of the emotions that it might.
And also, there is somehow things do get better.
So tell me how J&J was able to continue then after 75, because he was the momentum or the initial impetus.
Absolutely. Well, what had happened was when he knew he was ill, he had
cancer, didn't he?
He had cancer of the esophagus.
Right.
He put a team together. So I had, he picked a team so he knew that I had this team.
Right.
They all took a chance coming to work for me because, I knew nothing about manufacturing. I knew about buying and what's going to sell on the high street, but I knew nothing about manufacturing and running a factory. But he got me in very key people. So he really put everything in place. And then after Jack passed away, when I went in to see them at M&S, they were amazing. They said to me, obviously it's a terrible tragedy, but we will give you 2 years, Jenifer. We will support you for the next 2 years. Nobody will, be able to cancel contracts. We will support you.
Wow.
And then after that, you're on your own. But it doesn't get better than that, does it?
That's pretty good. M&S has always been a powerhouse, but I can imagine in the 60s and 70s, it really was an iconic fashion.
They never wanted to be manufacturers.
Right.
They were retailers, but they regarded it as a partnership. We were working together.
Right.
And when they had good times, we had good times. And if they had bad times, so we had tough times. That's how that relationship worked, and it was wonderful.
And J&J went from strength to strength, if I'm right. Is that where you met your third husband later on? And those businesses, am I right in thinking that there was a merger?
There was a merger. Ian had a textile business, and we were just purely manufacturing, and we merged the businesses. And it was great. And also, he had business skills that I didn't have. He was able to look at, we took over 2 or 3 different companies and things, and he had those visionary skills that I didn't really have. So we worked very well as a team.
And together you built that, I think you ended up with about 3,000 people.
Yeah, at one point
a dozen factories, is that right?
We had 12 factories.
Across the country?
Well, we weren't. It's interesting because we were focused mainly in the northeast.
Yes.
So we went from Blythe in the north to Sunderland in the south. In fact, I remember we were very near the Nissan factory. The big Nissan factory there is now in Sunderland. You probably don't know.
Right.
There is.
Can't remember. When was the last time I was in Sunderland? Don't know.
But it comes up a lot when they're talking about industry and the car industry.
Yes.
Because I remember when that opened, and that was such an exciting time for the northeast to have that Nissan factory up there. And it's been very successful.
Imagine.
It has been very, very successful. The people in the northeast have a wonderful work ethic. They're not militant. They really aren't. They just want to work hard and play hard. And they're great.
Nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that. And they're great to have as employees. They really are.
Okay. And that was, am I right in thinking you sold that business in 92?
We sold that business in 92.
And what did that feel like, to be able go through this and suffering loss
Well,
and experimenting.
but I
and
had a wonder, I mean, my years working in M&S were amazing.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. From
that was your
working for-
apprenticeship,
That
really,
was my
wasn't it?
apprenticeship, and then from supplying them,
Yep.
I had a wonderful time supplying them. I mean, we had ups and downs. Don't get me wrong. We had
Everyone does.
Everyone has ups and downs. It wasn't all sweetness and light. There were lots of dramas and things, but I still loved every moment of it. And then we got this offer. My Ian used to say to me, "Love me, but don't love your business."
Right.
And so you've got to, let go. And I was happy to let go. I really was. How old was I? I think I was 50, 52 or something.
Right.
And it was, time to say goodbye.
And did you feel at that point that you had achieved something, that there was obviously great success with it and financial security with it, all the things that one might associate with? At that point, did you really reflect and think to yourself, what have I achieved? In some ways to reflect, think, wow, what have I achieved? And what am I going to do next?
Well, no, I didn't. I think that I always felt the fact that after I won the Veuve Clicquot Businesswoman of the Year, which was in 86, 87, I felt that was a great acknowledgement of what I had achieved. It really, really was. And suddenly, from being just in my world, which was the M&S world, I got projected into the outer fashion world. So I became a governor of what is now the University of Arts London.
Yes.
I was on the board of the British Fashion Council. Suddenly I was projected out there. And I think all these accolades that came really showed that one had achieved a lot. And I felt very satisfied. I didn't actually, when we sold the business, think, what am I going to do next? I thought, well, there's a life is for living.
Yeah. And there must have been an incredible moment in some ways that was an end of one chapter.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, I wasn't to know how to, because after we sold in 92 and after that, it was a terrible recession again.
So again, timing.
I mean, in fact, the company we sold our business to went bust 3 years later.
Oh, wow, really? Wow. Just goes to show, doesn't it?
Just goes, timing is everything.
Timing is everything,
But the reason they went bust is that they didn't believe in design and innovation. And design and innovation is the lifeblood of everything. I mean, if you look at Steve Jobs with Apple, I mean, it was just, if you haven't got design and innovation, you've got nothing.
Do you think you were a bit of a visionary as you went through?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no.
Where did that come from, do you think?
I don't know. My mother had been very successful in the fashion business. She'd worked for this company that supplied what we used to call those days madam shops, whatever. No, my mother had been quite... and I think she was... my mother... I mean, I never had a day off school. I was never allowed a day off school. You just didn't get ill. You went to school every day.
That's a whole nother episode, isn't it, of life then and life now.
So I grew up with this, this focus on discipline and structure, and I think it pays dividends. I really do.
What's your advice to young leaders now? Those, I've got 2 teenagers who are going to be going into the market, and it was tough, the pandemic, I think, for our youngsters.
I think the pandemic was tough for everybody.
What's your what is your advice to these incredible young talents coming through in the modern day?
I think it's very different, isn't it?
Yeah.
They've got so many opportunities. And I don't think it's essential everybody goes to university. I mean, I think...
You didn't.
No, I didn't.
And look, wonderful career.
But what I'm saying is I think it is... I don't think I could achieve today what I did then.
Do you not?
No. I don't think I could have... I don't think any buying organisation would take somebody that doesn't have a degree.
Right.
I really don't think they would. So you'd have to have a degree. I don't think I could get into the manufacturing business as easily as I did. I mean,
That's a lot of pressure on people then, isn't it? To go down a certain path, whereas actually it's not everyone's route.
But I don't think that Tony Blair's vision of everybody going to university was right. I think it was wrong. And the fact that he turned all the polytechnics into universities and stopped the apprentice schemes, I think that was a disaster, an absolute disaster. Because not everybody's an academic. But what I think university does today, it broadens your mind.
Yes.
It gives you a more... I can tell the difference between myself and if I look at my trustees, I've got this amazing board of trustees on my charity.
Yes.
And they are also, far more accomplished than I am, and you can tell by the way they think and their mind process. So I think going to university develops your mind, and I think that's important.
And we talk a lot, don't we, about having a group of people around you where you've got diversity of thought, such rich and eclectic backgrounds. And obviously you had all of this experience, these opportunities and challenges when you experienced Ted Heath, Harold Wilson, Margaret Thatcher.
Well, it's funny you should mention that, because we opened the factory in January 1974.
Right.
When Ted Heath was in power, but we had something called a 3-day week.
Right.
Because he was in conflict with the miners. There wasn't enough electricity in the country. There wasn't enough power.
Yeah.
So businesses could only operate 3 days. So you either operated Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and that was it. And can you imagine a brand new business? You've got this contract, and your workers, his tiny workers were only allowed
3 days a week.
But we cheated.
What did you do?
We used to borrow a generator.
So you could. Well, there you go. Is this the first time you've said that?
Probably.
Okay.
But no.
But you found a way.
But you found a way, and it was just incredible. That's when you see footage of what was going on in England at that time. It was horrendous. And then, of course, Ted Heath went to the country. He lost. Harold Wilson got in with a small majority. Then he got in again. Then you had Labour. So
then you've experienced, All of that you've achieved in the changing political landscape, which everyone is experiencing.
I think the other thing, Adam, when you're young, and I don't know if you've experienced, you don't have fear. You really don't know what fear is. You're very, you're very confident. You're very upfront, and you always think you're right.
Where did that come from? Where did that confidence and that gung ho and
always?
Again, where's it coming from, though, Jenifer?
From me, I suppose. I don't know. My mother took both my sister and I. We went to dancing schools, stage schools. We did drama. We did everything, And I think that's terribly important when you're young to do that.
So the performing arts was a big piece.
Performing arts was a big thing.
Okay.
I always remember when I was actually at school. I went to a convent, and I was quite pretty as a little girl, and I was always tiny. But I couldn't sing.
Right.
So there's this show going on, and I'm up front miming this song, and this lovely girl, Valletta, who had a beautiful voice, is in the wings singing, and I'm miming.
Are you lip syncing, Jenifer? Is that what you're I tell you what, there's all kinds of revelations.
4 or 5 years old. And I always like to be in the front. You look at photographs of me as a child, I was always in the front.
Okay.
I always pushed myself to the front.
Well, maybe that was, did you say?
But I think when you do performing arts as a child, it gives you a lot of confidence.
Okay.
I think it's terribly important.
I want to move on to a very important phase in your life now, because we spoke a few weeks ago, and I know how passionate you are now in relation to the Heart Cells Foundation, and this comes to your husband, wasn't it, Ian, who had a bad heart, and tell us a little bit about how the Heart Cells Foundation really came about.
Right. Well, the Heart Cell Foundation came about because Ian developed a very, he'd had a heart attack before I met him.
Right.
When I met him, everything. In fact, Ian made me go with him before we got married to speak to his cardiologist, so his cardiologist could tell me exactly what the situation was. So I knew exactly that he'd had a heart attack, but he was fine.
Right.
I mean, he was, he didn't have a problem. But as the years went on, and we're now talking about sort of the early 2000s, his heart started to get worse, and we were away, and he developed something called heart failure. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with the heart is like a pump. It pumps everything around your body. It pumps your blood, all the fluid, and when that pump gets weaker, it's not pumping as fast, so you get something like fluid builds up in your body.
Okay.
And you get swollen ankles, swollen hands, and you get fluid in your lungs. And that affects your breathing, it affects you walking, it affects particularly going up and down stairs. It's really dire. So Ian developed this, and we went to see his own cardiologist, and he said, this is very serious. I don't think, Ian, you've got many months to live.
Right.
Like this gentleman you were interviewing last night.
Yeah.
But he said, a young cardiologist at Barts has just given a paper on this new treatment that's happening in Germany at the Frankfurt University Hospital called stem cell therapy.
Right.
Why don't you go and see him? So we the cardiologist at that time was was working out of the London Chest Hospital in Bethnal Green.
Right.
So we schlep all the way down to wherever it was, and to meet this young man called Dr. Anthony Mather. Now, Ian didn't know the word no. It didn't come into his vocabulary. He did not accept it. And everything had to be done now. You couldn't do anything tomorrow. It always had to be done now. So we meet Anthony, and the next thing, we're all on a plane to Germany, to Frankfurt, to meet Professor Zaire. And my husband has this treatment. And it was like magic. Whereas he hadn't been able to climb the stairs, he was sleeping downstairs in our house. Now he could climb up the stairs, and it was just such a transformation. It was unbelievable. And, we'd been away with Anthony, and Anthony had told him we don't have any money for this sort of research in the UK. It just isn't available.
Yes.
So Ian was so incensed that other people that have got this condition can't have this treatment that made such a difference to his life, that we set up the Heart Cell Foundation.
And that was in 2004? Right. Okay. So the two of you set it up. And tell us a little bit like what that was like to suddenly move into the charitable space.
We'd always been involved in charity work.
Okay. But to actually
do it,
build one yourself.
It all happened it was just, we didn't sit down and say we're going to create a charity. Somehow we got hold, this journalist, Marianne Powers, who was working for the Daily Mail at the time, Ian got hold of her somehow, and she came to our house and she did this 2-page editorial on him.
Yes.
And where we'd been to Germany, and that we were going to set the charity up.
Because that extended his life, didn't it?
Absolutely.
That treatment.
It gave him 3 years he wouldn't have had, and 3 very good years, amazing years. So she said to us, can you imagine a 2-page article, editorial in the Daily Mail?
Yes. Not
costing anything. But she said, you've got to, we hadn't even got a name for the charity. She said, you better get a name, you better get the charity registered. She said, when this article goes out, it's going to implode. You're going to get sacks of mail, you're going to get money, you need a bank account.
Yeah.
And she really made us put the charity together. So we started forming a board of trustees, we registered, and when you register a charity, you don't register it immediately, you apply for charitable status,
yes.
And it takes time to go through.
Right.
Anyway, and she was right, we got sack loads of mail. It was unbelievable.
Wow.
And people were sending us £5 notes, £10 notes.
They were sending you cash in the post?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, it was unbelievable.
I want to just read out some statistics here because you've given me some literature. And it's the #1 leading killer in the UK. One person dies every 3 minutes. These are quite frightening, aren't they, really? Every 5 minutes, 14 people are admitted to hospital due to a heart failure. 150 people die every day from coronary heart disease. I mean, I could go on.
It's
but
frightening.
These are quite shocking statistics,
They
aren't
are
they?
shocking statistics. And also, if you were to look at the statistics for women,
yes,
more women die from heart disease than breast cancer.
Oh, really?
They are so high.
Tell me a little bit about where the charity is now in 2023.
The charity is in an amazing place.
Right.
We managed to raise £6 million from our original, and our original launch was amazing. We had it at the Mansion House. Esther Ransom is still our patron.
Is she? Right, okay.
She has been
I've grown up, haven't I, with Esther Ransom on TV.
Well, her husband died from a serious
I didn't know that, right, okay.
Yeah, so she's got great empathy with us. And we've been very successful. Obviously, the pandemic affected us because Barts have now built, instead of operating out of the London Chest Hospital in the East End, we now have this amazing heart centre in Barts Hospital in the City of London.
Yes.
It's the best heart centre in Europe.
Wow.
It is unbelievable.
Okay.
In fact, when the Duke of Edinburgh was ill before he died, and he had a heart problem, he was taken into Barts.
Right, okay.
So now we have a compassionate unit at Barts Hospital, which we fund. We get no government funding at all, nothing.
Why is that?
Because, I will tell you,
if it's the UK's #1 leading killer.
Well, we should get it, but we don't.
Right.
But we have done 3 initial gold standard trials, which were brilliant. The success rate was fantastic. But now we've been told by the medical bodies that we now have to present a larger trial.
Right.
before we can get this accepted by the National Health and rolled out across the country. So that's now next year, when we will be 20 years old, we are going to have a major fundraising campaign. We have to raise £8 million to hold this larger trial. And then if the results of that trial are as good as the previous ones, we will be able to go to NICE, which is the governing body, and roll it out across the UK.
Do you feel that this part of your life and this focus is probably the most purpose-driven part?
Oh, it is so humbling when I meet the patients and I meet their families. It is unbelievable. I must just tell you one story.
Yes.
When we were still at the London Chest and we'd done the 3 gold standard trials where we treated 300 patients, half with their own stem cells and half with the placebo.
Right.
We had a patients gathering, so they all came. And this woman came up to me and she said, "I've just got to give you a hug." She said, "You have saved our lives." She said, "When we read the first article that Marianne Powers wrote in the Mail, we decided we're going to sell our house, and my husband, who had the same symptoms as your husband, we're taking him to Frankfurt."
Right.
Then she did a follow-up article, another 2-page article, after we'd been to Germany and how well Leon was doing. And that was when we launched the Heart Cell Foundation, she did this big 2-page editorial. So we read that and we realised we didn't have to go to Germany. We could come, that the Heart Cell Foundation would treat us. So she said, "Not only have you saved my husband because he's now so well, you've saved us financially because we didn't have to sell our house."
How does that make you feel?
There are no words to describe how you feel. It makes every minute I spend on this charity worthwhile.
With everything that you've experienced, and you and I could chat for hours, it's been great fun. What do you think, or what do you want your legacy to be in the world?
My legacy? I don't know. We are saving lives. We are saving lives on a regular basis. And if you look at the slip of that piece of paper I gave you, not that gentleman, Barry Newman, he's just competed earlier on this year in a go-kart race.
A world record.
A world record.
Okay.
And he was in bed. He couldn't do a thing. He could not move. And I did a programme for, what's the BBC programme that comes on at 7 o'clock at night? The One Show.
Okay, yes.
I did a One Show where they featured a patient and myself, and he saw it.
See, you've done TV and everything.
Yeah, I've done television quite a lot. I've done ITV, I've done GB News, whatever. But he saw that. And he thought, they're my symptoms. Anyway, to cut a long story short, he found us on the internet. We've treated him, and now 5 years later, he's competing in the go-kart World Championship. I mean,
Amazing.
Does it get better than that?
Probably not. And in a world that's gone quite mad, carry on being a force for good, Jenifer. Okay. And I just want to say a massive thank you for you taking the time to come. Have you enjoyed this?
I've loved it, absolutely.
I did say to you you'd have some fun.
No, it's good.
And thank you so much for coming in and sharing your story.
Do you think we've got enough?
I think we've got lots.
Okay, good.
Maybe we may even have you back and do another episode.
Okay.
What do you think?
Maybe, why not next year when we do our 20th year, when we launch our big campaign?
Yep. Why don't we do a live event?
Fine.
There we go. Deal. You see, it all happens. The magic happens
tell
here.
Me something. What are you doing on the 19th of November?
Next year?
This year. This year.
I don't know off the top of my head.
Well, would you like to come? We obviously have to raise money. We have a whole series of fundraising events, and we have our big event on the 19th of September. We're showing...
November.
November. Did I say December?
You said September.
No, November.
That's okay.
It's next month, and we will be showing a movie called Ferrari.
Right.
Which is starring Adam Driver, Penelope Cruz, and it's all about Enzo Ferrari and the troubles he had in the 50s.
Right.
And we're showing it 6 weeks before it goes on general release at the Mayfair Hotel. We're doing a champagne brunch and then the movie, so come.
Well, it doesn't get any better than that, does it, really? Well, thank you so much. Listen, you're an absolute superstar for coming into the studio.
I'm quite happy to come into the studio.
But as long as you've had fun.
I have.
And this is another great episode of The Leadership Enigma. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me, Adam.
It's my pleasure. Take great care. Join us again next week for more curiosity and insight with The Leadership Enigma. We'd love to hear your comments on today's show as well as suggestions for future topics and guests. Get in touch with me on LinkedIn or visit us at www.leadersenigma.com. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe on all your major podcast platforms and on our dedicated YouTube channel. Thanks again for joining the community.